Hello everyone, I'm Lokenyu from Singapore. Your first speaker for the conference is famed Rugby Sevens coach and current director of elite performance at Brentford Football Club, Ben Ryan, who will talk about creating a winning culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, to be able to talk to fellow coaches. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to explain what my principles are around creating and keeping a consistently high-performing environment for your athletes. But I thought I'd start it off with a brief 2-minute video that gives you some idea about the 3 years that I spent on the beautiful islands of Fiji.
It's been really tough, and you get knocked down twice or more times than you can count. See the reaction of people with houses destroyed, nothing left. And still they have their TV on and they're still cheering.
New Zealand considers rugby as second to religion. In Fiji, it is sevens that is number one.
They pray for the Fiji team to win,
Every man, woman and child, they all know everything about the team because they follow it so fanatically.
Fijians, they just play this complete opposite style of rugby that really no one in the world plays.
We play a chaotic game. We are so unpredictable to other teams.
Boom, step, and boom, accelerate,
You'll be chasing shadows when we're on form. It's one of those stories of these boys that can do amazing things against teams that are more developed, have more money, have more backup, have more things in every category except that ability and that heart and that nation behind them.
So I am sure the wishes of the people, the heart of the people are with the boys out there on the field, making them strong.
These boys, we will do anything for each other.
I don't want to write my name on sand, When the wind comes and blow it away. I want to write my name on stone.
And although it's a little bit of a spoiler that this story does end with an Olympic gold medal and the first ever medal that Fiji had got at a summer or winter Olympic Games, it's also not really any of the stuff that I'm going to talk about is really about rugby, nor is it about standing on the podium. It's about getting the best out of the people that you work with, for, alongside, and how you can help for as long as possible to create those opportunities to allow people to be at their best. And the other thing that happens normally when I stand up on stage and I get introduced as a rugby coach, you're probably expecting somebody that comes on stage that looks like they might actually have played rugby. I'm short-sighted, left-handed, ginger, none of the traits that you'd probably expect for a professional rugby player. And this probably was me at my peak at under-9s for Richmond Rugby Club in London. But I did go on to play age group international rugby, professional rugby in the Premiership. Had a couple of injuries near the end of my career, then ended up going back into professional rugby as player coach. And then I started became a teacher, and I worked my way up from age group teams, local teams, national teams, university teams, until eventually England asked me to be their head coach. And I was there for 7 years. I think I was the longest serving coach, and we had plenty of successes. But in my last year of being with the England team, I was kind of falling out of love with professional sports. I had lost the reason, the why I was a coach, and probably why I had become a teacher. And these were the things that were no longer with me. I didn't really feel any purpose on what I was doing. In fact, my last tournament in charge was the Rugby World Cup We'd just won the semi-final to get England into the World Cup final for the first time in 20 years. And as the whistle blew to get us into that final, I felt no elation, no joy. And I knew at that moment, even with a final ahead of us, that I needed to leave and do something else. And I didn't have the security in feeling safe to be able to have the conversations with my bosses and not feel it was working against me. I didn't feel I had any autonomy. And I like to use the metaphor of, particularly in Copenhagen, that was about the safest walk I'd had in the last couple of days with all the bicycles. And as a coach, when I started as a coach, teaching under 14 kids playing soccer actually, I felt like I was a bicycle, like not a very good bicycle, a rusty old bicycle. Didn't look very good, only had a couple of gears. But I just started off as a coach, and I was in control of that bicycle. And if there was something in my way, I might have hit it as I was learning to be a better coach, and next time I would have navigated my way around. Now, as my coaching journey progressed, and I got to be in charge of bigger teams with more money and bigger budgets, so did my bicycle change as well, until it became a big juggernaut when I was with England Rugby, the richest rugby union in the world. And it was shiny, it was fast, it was really big, it looked amazing from the outside. But I wasn't on the front. I couldn't have really any say in which direction it went into. It was very hard to change direction. And I was at the back somewhere feeling as though I had lost my autonomy and I was out of control. And so I left England. And I was offered a job in the English Institute of Sport, and it was kind of backstage strategy stuff for the next Olympic cycle. But then a mate said to me on Twitter, sent me a message and said, have you seen that Fiji are looking for a new head coach? Now, I had played against Fiji, I had coached against Fiji, I'd seen when they were at their best, they were almost untouchable, but they were incredibly inconsistent, and they were going for a really dark time in their history. But there was something in me that thought my coaching journey wasn't over, and I wanted to find out where this might take me. So I sent an email to the Fijian Rugby Union. They said, look, we know who you are. Let's have an interview. Back then it was on Skype at 2 in the afternoon in the capital, Suva, which was 2 in the morning in southwest London where I was living. So this is a representation. First time I put a tie on since I left school, downed a couple of espressos, 2 in the morning, got my laptop on the breakfast table at home, put it up, ready to go for my interview to be the head coach of Fiji, and nothing. 2:30, nothing. 3 o'clock, nothing. Now, if any of you have been to the islands, then you'll understand a little bit about Fiji time. No hurry, no worry. And if somebody's going to be late for a meeting or doesn't even turn up for a meeting, then perhaps that meeting wasn't too important in the first place. But 2 hours later, at 4 a.m., suddenly it whirred into action, and my face was getting projected onto the back screen of the CEO's office in 35 Gordon Street, Suva, the headquarters of the Fijian Rugby Union. And he said, Bulla, and there were lots of other people peering into the laptop and saying hello. They asked me very important questions, like, have I met the Queen? Did I know Johnny Wilkinson, who is a very famous English rugby player? I managed to stay awake, which I thought was a success. And I put the laptop down. And in the morning, I thought I'd find out a little bit more about Fiji. I'd never been to Fiji. And I went onto the Fiji Times website, which is the 2 newspapers in Fiji, the Fiji Times and the Fiji Sun. I went into their website, and the front page was the CEO who had interviewed me the previous evening had been sacked overnight. So I thought, okay, well, this isn't going to go anywhere. And a couple of weeks later, I'm in Richmond in southwest London. In fact, that's just opposite from where Ted Lasso gets filmed. And I get a phone call, and it's a Fijian number. And I pick it up and say hi. And they say, oh, Bulla Ben, this is Berlin Kafoa. I'm the new CEO of the Fijian Rugby Union. I said, hi, Berlin, what can I do for you? He said, oh, well, we've got a press conference here in 20 minutes' time. I said, okay, that sounds interesting. You know, what's it about? He said, oh, it's to name you as our new head coach. So another graphic representation. I said, okay, do I get any say in this? He said, yeah, 20 minutes, call me back. Now, if I'd been very English and I had had 24 hours, I would have got my pad of paper down, I would have written all the pros about, what it would be like to go to Fiji. I would have written the cons. I didn't know how long my contract was going to be, how much I was going to get paid, who was left from the team, who my bosses were, what it would be like to live in Fiji. But I had 20 minutes. And it was one of those decisions that ended up probably being the best decision of my coaching career, where my heart was right up there, soaring away, excited about the opportunity to maybe work with these talented athletes. But my stomach was doing somersaults and was worried about what's behind that. But I didn't have time for the stomach to win. And 20 minutes later, I rang back. I said, okay, I'm in. He said, great. If you can fly to Fiji in the next few days, if you don't mind buying your plane ticket, we'll pay you back when you get to Fiji. And that's a check that I'm still waiting for. But 5 days later, I appear via 3 flights to Fiji on the west coast of the main island in Nadi. Ready, I'm thinking, after 40 hours flying, that I would be able to just get off the flight, go to sleep, and meet everyone the following morning. And as I came off, I was live on telly for the next 6 hours. It's the national sport in Fiji. When I met a few hours later the old coach, he said to me, Ben, if you end up winning a tournament for Fiji, they'll probably have a bank holiday. But if you lose, your house will probably get stoned. And I thought, well, that's not ideal. I then got on a 26-minute flight across to the capital of Suva, where I met the Fijian government and the rest of the Fijian rugby board. And I would find out over the next 48 hours that they'd gone bust, they'd got no money, they'd gone bankrupt, have no money to fund any of their programs. And World Rugby, who is the same equivalent as the BWF, they had frozen all their funding because they were investigating Fiji for corruption. Their players had disappeared and gone overseas to find work, to play for professional clubs in New Zealand, Australia, in the UK and France. So none of the players from the last 2 seasons were around. And my boss, well, that's my boss in the middle, Frank Bainimarama. Now, Frank was the military dictator of Fiji. And like any good dictator, he's got 2 coups on his CV. In fact, his last coup, he delayed it by 24 hours because there was a very important rugby match he wanted to watch. So he watched the Fijian Army play the Fijian Navy, and then the following day he grabbed his semi-automatic assault rifles and took over government. Now, however you become in charge of Fiji, you're also the president of the Fijian Rugby Union. So he became my boss, and he decided to put his brother-in-law as my line manager, as chairman, Francis. Now, Francis had just got out of prison for murder. It had been downgraded because none of the witnesses showed up at his trial. So he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. He served 4 weeks on full naval pay because he was in the Navy. And then his brother-in-law, Frank, thought, do you know what? I think he's learned his lesson. He's been fully rehabilitated. Let's create the Yellow Ribbon Project where he'll be the first recipient and he'll leave prison. And he needs a job. So let's make him chairman of the Fiji Rugby Union, and he can line manage Ben. So to have a convicted murderer and a military dictator as your 2 bosses definitely tested my ability to up-manage, something I'll talk about later. And the team had just been picked for the first tournament. Now, the World Sevens is a bit like Formula One. There are 10 places that you go to around the world, 10 stops around the world, and you get points for however well you do at those. And at the end, a world champion is named. And for the first time, since I think the 1924 Olympic Games, rugby had returned back into the Olympic family and was going to be in the Rio Olympic Games in 2016. 7 selectors had picked the team. I looked down the list. I only recognized 1 player from my previous time coaching against them. And I thought we were 4 days away from our first tournament over in Australia on the Gold Coast. What gets measured gets managed. As a coach, we need to understand what our start points are, what our baselines are. So I thought, do a fitness test with them, a really simple fitness test. I could see then what sort of load I can put into the players over the next 3 or 4 days before the tournament. And the left-handed, short-sighted, ginger Englishman won the fitness test. And I was not very fit at the time. And that wasn't a good sign. And the one player that I recognized on the list from the previous year playing for Fiji wasn't there, hadn't shown up. So I got my team manager to drive our team minibus to his village, and I found Eli in the middle of the village lying on the floor. And I thought, well, maybe he had been out that night, had a few drinks, and that was the problem. I said, Eli, what's wrong? You've missed training. He said, sorry, I've not been able to stand up for 2 days. Someone's put a black magic curse on my legs. Now, I hadn't had that as an excuse that any of the English players used to miss training back in London. But I knew that as a coach coming into a different culture, and I'm sure some of you will be coaching athletes from your own nations, and some will be coming into other nations, you've got to make sure that your first few moments into your new culture, you appreciate what you're coming into and you understand the timing of what you're coming into. And I wasn't going to make any big decisions. I certainly wasn't going to tell him, it's ridiculous, stand up, Plus he's our kicker, so it'd be hard for him to play if he couldn't stand up. So I said, good luck. I hope you can stand up soon. And we went to Australia to play the first game. Wales smashed us out of sight. We managed to win our next 2 games, and then we qualified as best or worst runner-up in the group, which got us into the quarterfinals against my old team, England, and they smashed us. And I got back on the following morning. I got a lift from the CEO to the airport, where I was about to then begin my journey back to London, pack all our stuff, and then return back to Fiji, where I was going to then live for the next 3 years. And the CEO said to me, one more thing, Ben, we haven't got any money to pay you. And I thought he meant that weekend. So I said, look, don't worry about it. My agent's just sorting all of that out. We can work it out in a week. And he said, no, we haven't got any money to pay you for the next 6 months. You're going to have to do this as a volunteer. So there's quite a lot of negative things in those first few days that were rattling around in my head. But I'd had about 3 or 4 training sessions with the team, and they were unfit. They really didn't have a plan. They certainly didn't know nutritionally what to do. They were a bit disorganized, but they were so happy, they were so grateful, they were so joyful when they were training that it reminded me of why I became a coach, why I became a teacher, to help people be their best. That's it. That's all I ever do, and that's what I do now in the Premier League in Brentford for my staff, for the players, for the coaches, help them be at their best as long as they possibly can be. And a little bit like the coconut trees that you see all over the Pacific, they can resist hurricanes and cyclones. They're very resilient, very robust, but they need to be given the basic foundations of sunshine, sustenance from the soil, and water. And I thought, if I can provide the basic foundations for these athletes to do their job and not worry about that, then we might go on to achieve something that's quite special. And so for those next 3 flights, I decided that it's really easy to work out your budget when you've got $0. So that took me all of a couple of minutes to work my budget out. And then I planned my work for the next 3 years. I knew that the Olympics would be in 3 years' time. We were ranked down at 12, I think, in the world after that first tournament. But I knew that as a result of my planning, our aim from day one was to go and get an Olympic gold medal in Rio. And you plan your work, and then you work your plan. And it's one of these things that my manager, Thomas Frank at Brentford, he probably won't talk about how much planning goes into how we prepare the team, how we prepare the organization over the day, the week, the month, the season. But if you don't get that planning right, and you don't create enough performance planning to allow you to maneuver it during the year, then you've got absolutely no chance to achieving where you want to get to. And that was the first thing I did, and I shared the plan with the people that I needed to share it with. I always, in my head, have certain guiding principles, and one of them is only involve those that are involved. And so anybody that I needed to be involved in the program, I shared the plan with. And then when I came back, and I do this everywhere I go, I have to start to build trust with the people I'm going to work with. And you can't just build trust overnight. It takes time. And every one of us have our own ABCs. How we like to be approached initially, to have conversations, how I like someone to behave with me when they're having that conversation, and then the actual conversation itself. What's in that conversation? How much of it is to the point, and how much of it is holding back? And we all I have to understand everybody I work with, their ABCs, so that I can start to build trust. And with some of those players, it would just be a word, it would just be a sentence, it would just be a nod, but you're slowly building the trust until eventually, hopefully, you're getting to get to a deeper level where they'll start to listen, understand, and act on some of the advice that you're hoping to give them as a coach. And the other thing, and I've got a friend that used to work in the murder squad in London, so he would try to solve pretty serious crimes, and he would talk about forensically, every contact leaves a trace. So he would be looking for a clue from a broken window or a footprint. But when I meet someone, or when you meet someone, or when any of us meet someone, you always leave a trace. There's always something that you leave. And again, a guiding principle for me and is to always try to leave a positive trace with people. And I think that was really important for me. It's also important to leave a trace and around our dictator, Frank, and also access his PIN code. Persuasion, influence, negotiation. Sometimes the easy thing for us as coaches is to have a solution to how a player or a team or an organization can get better. That's often the easy thing. The hard thing is then persuading, influencing, and negotiating athletes, organizations, bosses to buy into that, to allow us to make those changes. And take Frank. Frank walked into the KFC in Suva, in the capital of Fiji, once and said, I want to know what your secret herbs and spices are. And KFC said, well, we're not going to tell you. So he shut down every KFC in Fiji overnight, and 15 years later, there's still no KFCs. So he was someone that I had to manage really well and up-manage, and maybe in the Q&A, I'll talk to you about some of these examples of how I made sure that he allowed me to do my job without suffocating me as a coach and as a leader. And when I went back, I had to travel around the islands, because this is part of kind of my MOT when I go anywhere. I have to understand not just the culture you're going into, but also the time that you go into that culture, that moment in time for that team that you're entering that culture. And I needed to understand a little bit more about where the players came from. I didn't bring any of my overseas coaches with me. It was all Fijian backroom staff that I had. The players were all Fijian. I had never been to school in Fiji. I hadn't eaten Fijian food, listened to Fijian music. But I needed to understand the people that I was going to work with so that then I could start to find the trampolines. Now, all of us, as individuals, as organizations, as teams, have trampolines, have things that we do that if we can get the most out of them, we'll jump on them and it will accelerate our performances. It's a bit like applying Pareto's principle, that 80% of your success is based around 20% of the things you do. Now, without getting hung up on the 80-20, effectively it means we've all got some golden strands in what we do that provide the most amount of energy and momentum to achieve what we want to do, both individually and collectively as a team. And I need to find those with people and with the organizations. And there was a really simple one in Fiji straight away. The team were unfit, so however talented they were, they just couldn't sustain performance because their bodies didn't allow them to. And as you will all know, if your bodies start to let you down because they're not fit enough, then the clarity, the fog will come into your mental decision making as well. And we didn't have any money, so I couldn't start to spend money on any expensive equipment to get us fit, but we did have the Singatoka sand dunes, beautiful World Heritage site. They drift up, some of them up 200, 300 meters. On one side, you have the Pacific and the coral reefs. On the other side, you have the villages and the mountains. We'd get there really early in the morning because by about 8 in the morning, the sand would be too hot on your feet. And at the end, we'd finish. We'd go down to the waterfalls. The locals would provide us with some food, and we'd finish the week there together as a collective. And looking back at the hard work that we've done joyfully. Now, one of the first training camps that I did was finishing on the Singatoka sand dunes. And when I went around the islands, when I came back from England, I went to look at all the different tournaments and see all the different players. And I found Jerry. I was at this small tournament on an island, and I suddenly saw this player do things that I'd never seen a rugby player ever do. His ability with the ball in attack was phenomenal. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He was just evading people without even trying. He was our Messi. But when he was defending or had to do some hard work, he wasn't interested. Stand in the middle of the field, watch everyone defend and do some hard work and wait for the fun to come again and he could get the ball again. Now, as a coach, you can go one of two ways there. You can decide, I don't like, he's got no hard work in him, he's not going to be good for us. And you put him at the bottom of the class and give him an E. Or you go, I can see what he can do, and I'm going to give him an A star. I'm going to bring him in, and we're going to see what we can do with him. And we went to the Singatoka sand dunes, and we were starting off with a fairly easy one that went up about 50, 60 meters. And you'd sprint up for 5 or 6, 7 seconds, come back down, have a 1-to-2 ratio where you'd rest for twice the amount of time as you were running, and then you'd go again. And on the sand, you can get fit really fast, and it's a terrific way to try to improve their fitness. And after about 3 of those runs, I was ready to go for another one with my whistle, and I looked down the line. Jerry wasn't there. Now, we've got some bushes that are just behind the sand dunes, and I could hear some rustling in the bushes. And I saw an elbow poking out. And so I got close to the bush, and I could see Jerry was in the bush. Now, he was probably thinking, oh, Ben might not have seen me in the bush, or he'll see me in there, and he'll just turn a blind eye. And I grabbed him, and I pulled him out, and he finished the session. And at the end of the session, I said to him, Jerry, let me give you a lift home. Let me come and see your mum and dad. Let me see where you've grown up. And let's have as they say in Fiji, a talanoa, a talk with your family to see how we can help you become better. He got in the car and we started to drive towards where he grew up. Now, most of you will probably think Fiji is beautiful golden sands and blue skies, and it is all of that for the tourists. But most of the locals live in the interior in very simple structures and settlements. And Jerry lived in the one area in Fiji that the police would regard as dangerous in Newtown. In fact, fast forward 3 years, and he was in the team. In fact, he scored the second try in the final that won us the gold medal. After the game, German TV interviewed him and said it must have been a lot of fun to learn how to play rugby on the beach with a coconut. Backing up all those stereotypes that people have. And he took his shoes and socks off, and he showed the German TV presenter his feet and all the scars on the bottoms of his feet. And he said, I learned how to play rugby on a traffic roundabout. And I went to that traffic roundabout because it was next to where his mum and dad's house was. And to call it a house would be an exaggeration. It was a shed. It was 2 rooms. His mum and dad had 1 room where they slept. And then Jerry and his 5 brothers and sisters had 1 room where they would cook, sleep, eat. There was a long drop toilet outside, and there was no electricity, and they didn't have a generator. And I saw his mum and dad, and I said to his mum, Vunissa, I said, your son is so talented, but unless he understands and connects between working hard in training, we're never going to see his talent flourish. And then his mum said, well, he left school when he was 13. He would go with his dad and spear fish in the local bay, Boover Bay. And then at about 5, 6 in the morning, once they'd collected the fish, he would be standing on the side of the road, and he would be selling the fish, and he wouldn't leave that side of the road until he'd sold his fish. So I'm thinking as a coach, well, that doesn't make me think that he's not a hard worker. And then his dad said, Poasa, when he was 16, he came to see his mum and dad and said, I want to be a professional rugby player. This is my dream. And his mum and dad didn't say, you're being ridiculous. You've got to carry on doing what you're doing. We're literally on the breadline. We've hardly got enough money to live day to day. His mum and dad went without food for a week. They saved their money. They went to the only sports shop in the capital at the time, bought the cheapest pair of football boots they can. They sat him down and said, gave him his right boot and said, this is your knife. Gave him his left boot and said, this is your fork. And said, this is what you will use to put food on the table for me, for us, for our family. And it was such a powerful story that they told me when I was sitting down with them. And on reflection, it reminds me of one very strong strength we should all have as coaches, and that's to be curious. Because if I had looked at that kid in the hiding and not wanting to do any more runs and thinking he doesn't care, hasn't got the hard work gene, I'd have never got in the car, driven to see where he comes from, hear those stories, and then 3 years later, he would have been in the team that won an Olympic gold medal. And then another 4 years on from then, he captained the team and is the only rugby player in the world to have 2 Olympic gold medals. And so I went to all the families and I sat down with all of them and tried to find out what their network were, because again, going back to you only involve those that are involved. When Jerry was getting his program for the week or the month, I would tell his mum, tell his dad what he was doing, where he was going, to help put as many people around him as possible to help change some of his habits and his behaviors. It's a little bit like if a friend gives up smoking, tell as many people as you can that you're giving up smoking, so it forces you to try to accelerate again, the trampolines again, to jump onto those habits. And we carried on training, and we went to Dubai, which was the second tournament in the World Series, a tournament that had been going for 50 years, and Fiji had never won it. And we played the All Blacks, probably the most revered sports team in the world, in the semi-final, and we won 44 points to 0. It remains the All Blacks' heaviest defeat at any level of the game of all time. And then we did the same to South Africa in the final. By that point, people are starting to think that they've got this miracle worker as this new English head coach. And actually, just before we played the All Blacks, it was the first time I gave any of the Fijian boys a can of Red Bull. And I think they could have kept going for a couple of weeks after that semi-final. But when you have success as a coach, it also allows you a voice to up-manage not just your athletes and your and your bosses, but also your supporter base, to tell them that whilst we have sunshine today, we may have showers tomorrow. This was the beginning of a project that is going to have lots of ups and downs. And to be able to have the ability to tell people that it's not always going to be like this will help everybody understand the landscape that you're working in. Some people did get a little bit carried away. And over the next 3 years, we had a journey that ultimately led us to the Olympic final. And I want to pick out a couple of small stories that I think are relevant towards the principles that I have. The first one is, this is in Las Vegas. If you've ever had to take a team or an athlete to Las Vegas, it's a difficult place to keep everybody under control. In fact, after the first night that we got to the hotel on the Strip where all the other 16 teams were, I wanted to check and make sure that everybody was in their rooms. And I knocked on the first door, no answer, and it was unlocked. I went in, no one's in there. I'm thinking, okay, he's next door. Next door, no one in there. I'm working my way down the corridor, and there are no Fijian players in their rooms at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm thinking, oh no, this is going to really go badly wrong. And I got to the last room, and all the players had taken their mattresses and they'd put it in the captain's room, and they were all sleeping in the captain's room because they felt safe and secure there. Now, we'd just got to Vegas on the back of the largest cyclone and storm ever recorded in the Southern Hemisphere, and it remains today as the second biggest natural storm, most violent storm in the history of mankind. It was a Category 5 cyclone that went past the island, and normally in cyclone season they go past, they lose they lose power, they disappear off into the Pacific. But this one stopped, it reversed, and it went straight through the main island, Viti Levu. And a third of the villages were destroyed, a third of the people were homeless, and a third of the players' houses were lost. And then on the back of that, we all got something called Zika, which is a very virulent conjunctivitis, which meant that only 8 out of the 13 players in the squad were allowed to fly to Vegas a week later. And we got there, and we played on the Friday night, our first pool game, and we lost. And I got back on the bus. It was the one game that we were going to go back, recover, and then play the rest of our pool games on the Saturday. It was a tournament that if we'd won, we'd qualify for the Olympic Games. And I sat on the bus and I thought, we've got every reason why we've done badly tonight. You know, the boys are worried about what's happening back at home. They're ill. We haven't had any training going into the tournaments. And our captain came and sat down next to me, Osea, and he said, Ben, I think our plane crashed tonight. Now, I like storytelling as a coach. I think it makes some of the things that you want players to understand, to remember, stickier. They remember stories, and I like using themes during the week and storytelling to try to allow that to happen more often. So you can kind of hope that your athletes, your teams retain the information a bit more. And I told a story about an airline that had crashed, and that how it was a number of things that had caused eventually the plane to crash into the hillside. It was pilot and co-pilot hadn't worked together. The plane had got swapped. There was the long delays. There was crosswinds. There was a flashing red light that was obscured by a key fob. And all of these things meant that the plane lost altitude and ended up crashing. And that's like high performance and success. It's generally never one thing that causes your demise as an athlete or as a team. It's a collection of small things that drop your altitude as a coach to not make you be at your best. And the key for both you and for your athletes and your organization is having the ability to, when you start to see your plane losing altitude, you can see it and you can put some interventions in place so that you allow yourself to get back to the level you want to. And I said, okay, I said, so what do you mean, how did our plane crash? He said, well, we had a meeting in the morning, and the players wanted to have their own meeting, and they talked for too long, so they missed breakfast. And then they were running around trying to find breakfast at the hotel, and they were late for the bus. And then one of the players left his boots in the hotel, and then they fell asleep on the bus because there was a traffic jam on the way to the stadium. Then we were late for the warm-up because we were trying to find boots. So the one player that had left his boots at the hotel, and then we got our first call wrong because someone had heard the wrong call. I said, okay, it does sound like our plane crashed tonight. So Osea said, great, if you can have a meeting when we get back, tell us what we should do tomorrow, and then we'll be okay. And I said, yeah, we can definitely have a meeting when we get back, but I'm not going to be in it. Now, my end goal as a coach is to go and sit in the stand at the biggest game that I'll ever be at and have a beer and let the team do their thing, to make myself redundant, to take myself out of the job. Because if I can do that, then I know that I've put things along the road towards that final game or that final match that means that all the players know what they're doing. The athletes know they have the alignment. They don't need the coach anymore. Now, if you have that mindset, that means along that road, you must allow players, must allow your athletes autonomy to make their own decisions, to control large parts of your program so that they can feel that autonomy and create that alignment. And they had their own meeting the following day. They came back to the tournament. They won the next 5 games. They won the tournament and qualified for the Olympic Games. Now, if I reverse back again to another story that I'd like to tell you, it was early on when we were doing some testing. This is the England team. My last year with England, we were doing 3 PhDs. This was about how you lose heat from the warm-up to the pitch and how we can try to retain some heat. On the other side of this were the All Blacks laughing at us. But we had lots of resource and money for the team. And this is our sports science department on the left. Fiji, green coconuts after training. Before training, brown coconuts after training. Now, if we were going to do a speed test with England, they would put on all their Lycra and their spikes. We would go down to the athletics track right by where the team trained. They would have electronic timing gates at 2, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 and 40 meters. They would have high-speed, high-definition cameras, front-on, side-on, a wind gauge to measure wind speed. They would then hurtle down the track where they would get recorded. It would then be, once the biomechanical analysis had occurred and the speed coaches got involved, it would then get sent back to their individual iPads where they would get some instructions over a 8-12-week speed program on how maybe they can improve their speed by 1 or 200ths of a second. What gets measured gets managed, and that's how we did it with England. Now with Fiji, we didn't have any money. We certainly didn't have any athletics track or any speed gates, but I wanted to see how quick they were so I could put my own program in place to try to help them. We had a coconut tree, so I thought, well, that can be where they finish. I had a plastic bag, so I put that down about 40 meters away, got my phone and a stopwatch, had my whistle. I asked them to start sprinting. Everybody in this room would have run faster than them that morning. And they kept running, and it was so slow, I thought I'd done something to anger them culturally. I'd made a mistake. I had an error somewhere. And I said to our physio, William, William, what can I do? What's happening? And he said, well, why don't you just get someone to chase them? So I was like, yeah, okay. So I put someone 2 meters behind, and they ran faster because they didn't want to get caught. It was a bit of fun. And then he said, why don't you put someone in front with a rugby ball? So I did the same, and they tried to chase the guy that had the rugby ball. Now, I had thought as a coach, obviously they understand that I've put this 40-meter speed test in place for them to measure, manage, put a program in place. They just thought, why is this crazy English guy getting me to run from the plastic bag to the coconut tree? It's not fun, not getting any fitter, just doing it a couple of times, not scoring any tries. And it was a moment for me where I'd again lost my way a little bit as a coach, and it's like, connect what you're doing to the why. So everything I do now, I will always make sure that I tell the athletes why I'm doing it. This is the benefit to you as an athlete, to us as a team, and why I'm taking you off carbohydrates for a month. I'm getting you up in the middle of the night to break jet lag, circadian rhythm. I'm getting you up early to run up a sand dune. I'd explain the reasons, the benefits, why. Because all of us, as athletes, as former athletes, a lot of us would have been, or as coaches or as human beings, if someone's asking me to do something, even if we have an amazing culture around the organization, the we before the me, and I'm still thinking on some level, how's it benefit me? And you have to explain that and be upfront about it. And then the athlete or the team, they'll say, okay, I'll do that, I agree to that. And then they start to own it and they start to control it. So that when it gets put under pressure, and taking a team off sugar and carbohydrates for a couple of months for Olympic Games was a very tough ask. But when they agreed it, they manage it and they police it, it suddenly means that the head coach isn't the one pointing fingers when things are perhaps not getting done, because the players, the athletes themselves, are the ones deciding that and controlling that. And once you have those foundations in place, you have to establish the guardrails. And this isn't just about your athlete. This is all the departments that work for you. This is the coaches that work around you. And if you can up-manage them well, it's also your bosses. Establish the parameters, the guardrails. And I like to use another story around the guardrails of a bridge, because I was doing this with some players in Scotland, and it was by the Firth of Forth Bridge. Now, if any of you are bridge nerds, this is not the Firth of Forth Bridge, so I apologize. I've found another photo that explains this a little bit more. But while we were there, and I was talking about the Firth of Forth Bridge, and I said, like, how many of you have driven your car over that bridge? And they all put their hand up. Yeah, we've all driven over it. I said, okay. Would you drive over that bridge if there were no sides, if there were no guardrails? And they're like, well, I've got a very nice car. I'm not sure I would. It's very windy up there. If I do, I'm going to drive pretty slowly down the middle. I said, okay. So you've all driven over that bridge. Yep, we've all driven over the bridge. How many of you have crashed your car on that bridge onto the sides? And none of them have. And that's kind of the key on when you create rules or guardrails around your athletes, around your organization, around your planning. If you have them so tight that your athletes are suffocated by all the rules you're putting into place and all the standards you're trying to get them to do, you will not get that athlete working at their optimal because they won't be able to fully be themselves. If you make it so wide that there's just absolutely no rules whatsoever and no one knows which direction to go, then you're also not going to be getting your athletes at the right level. And what the art is, as coaches, is to get those guardrails at the right width and right height so that you can allow inside those guardrails for your athletes to really motor, to really be themselves as well, so that they can achieve what they want to do. And we all kind of like, in one form or another, to feel that kind of containment, so you know exactly what your direction is. And as a slight side point, I remember speaking to a guy called Ndamukong Suh in the NFL, and I was asking him about what he didn't like about his franchise, about the team, anything he didn't like. And he said, yeah, I hate it when I don't get given my program. And I said, what, because you want to know when you've got your day off, when you can pick up your kids, when you can go and play golf? He said, no, because it shows that I lose my autonomy, that they don't care about me. I'm just a number, that they feel like I can just turn up on Monday and they'll tell me what I've got to do on Monday, and I have no idea what I'm doing the following day. And that's the same thing when you've got in your head about guardrails, any areas where you're reducing the autonomy of your athletes. Because if you don't create clear black and white, then you get grey. And if you get grey in your program or in your relationship with the athlete, then you get fog. And if you get fog, then it doesn't matter how good your performance planning is, you can't see it and you're not going to achieve it. And it also means that when somebody does crash into your guardrails, you see it and you act on it. Now, this is Pio. Pio was our vice captain before the Olympic Games. 6'5", 120 kilograms, but played so athletically that every coach after a game would say, how does a guy that's so big move around the field so balletically? I was by the side of his wife's bed when she passed from cancer, and he was one of the players who had his house destroyed by Cyclone Winston. One of the nights of our last training camp before we name our Olympic squad, he goes out drinking. Now, the players had decided that if anybody goes drinking alcohol when they're in training camp or at a tournament, they will immediately get dropped for the next tournament. And the players had decided that, and they controlled that. It just so happened that the next tournament was all of our biggest tournaments, the Olympic Games. That night, not a single person knocked on my door and said, he's our vice captain, he's so important to us, we've got to turn a blind eye here and allow him to be in the team. Because they knew that if we were going to fail and not win an Olympic gold medal, it wouldn't be because in the final someone drops the ball or misses a tackle. It will be because 6 months earlier, we dropped our values and we didn't show our consistent behaviors. And once you get that understanding between the athletes you work with, then you can start to really achieve beyond what's possible. And it kind of reinforces my point, the standard you walk past is the standard you become. When someone jumps into a guardrail, however small, you pick them up on it. So for me, I might be in the office at Brentford at 6:30 in the morning. We've got our paddle normally, play a bit of paddle in the morning, and then we'll have meetings at 7:30, and then we'll have training. I'll have lots of different meetings with various people and some analysis and some other stuff, and I might be rolling out of the training ground at 5:30, 6 o'clock. And I see one of the other players that's maybe one of our rehabbers that's leaving, and he's being rude to one of the cleaners. Now, I've seen it, but I've just had 12 hours, probably missed lunch. I'm going to miss dinner if I don't get home in time. I'm hungry. I'll deal with him in the morning. It's fine. You know, it's not going anywhere. If I do that and I walk past that behavior, I don't pick him up on it straight away, then I'm that person being rude to the cleaner, and our whole standard of our whole organization is down here. And when people understand that about your consistent micro behaviors do make a difference to your ultimate big goal stuff that you're all trying to achieve, that's when you get those That's when the great changes from the good to become the great. And we would have over the next few years other things that would get in our way. We had the cyclone that came through. We had another attempted coup. But we won our first world championship, and then we backed it up with our second world championship. And then we went to the Olympic Games as number 1 seeds and favorites. We were the last group of athletes to enter the Olympic Village because we can control the chaos in the village, and maybe we'll talk about this a bit in the Q&A. But we can control that. And so we came into the village last. We decided that no one would have their laptops, no one would have their mobile phones. Our team manager had a phone in case there were any dramas, but we just stayed tight and could control again what we could control. Because back in Fiji, it was all going bonkers, crazy. They were already having a bank holiday just to plan the parties. We won our group games. We played New Zealand in the quarterfinals, and then won our semi-final, and then got to the final. And as a coach, that's your moment, right? The big final. I don't know if any of you like your sports films. I imagine you do. I love mine. Any given Sunday, I remember that well. And this was my chance to have this amazing speech before the final. I'd practiced it. I'd even rung my mum back in London to say, what do you think of this? Ready to go. Walk into the changing rooms just before the final, ready for my speech. And I'm seeing the players smiling, laughing, positive body language, having little conversations with each other. And I'm thinking that if anything I say now is just for me, it's not for them. So I said, have fun, good luck. I walked round to the tunnel. Great Britain, who we were playing, who had just beaten South Africa in the other semi-final. My old team were on one side of the tunnel. They were tight, they were nervous, their jaws were clenched. They were shouting at each other and getting each other ready. And our players were jogging through then, followed me, and they jogged through, and the referee was there in the middle, and our captain was running through, and his hand was going there. He was going right for the referee's bum. And I thought, that's not a good start to Olympic final. And just as he got there, he raised it and put it onto the referee's shoulder and said, have a good game, sir. And I turned around, and it reminded me when I was 12, 13, at junior school, and I'm looking at my watch, and it's like 2 minutes to 12, and I'm waiting for the bell to go so I can rush out and play football in the yard with my mates. And it's that natural just desire to want to play. And the English boys, the Great Britain boys, were looking tight and nervous, and the Fijian boys were looking relaxed. And I thought the game at that point had already been won. And after 30 seconds, we scored our first try. We scored 5 more by half-time. The IOC gave us the male team performance of the Olympic Games. We went back to, everyone was very happy. We went back to Fiji for 3 days of bank holidays. Crazy scenes, the first medal ever won. They knighted me and gave me the highest civilian order in the country. I'm also the first non-Fijian chief. So my formal Fijian name is Ratu Penny Rayani Latinara from the Saruan clan in Fiji, and I have to go back to Fiji when we have a great council of chiefs meeting. We've got a WhatsApp group, so it's easy. They gave me 3 acres of land and a waterfall and a beach, which I went back to in the summer. And the Prime Minister, Frank, who is currently awaiting, he lost the elections recently and has immediately been arrested, and he's just in court at the moment and facing some time in prison. He had decided to take the Queen out of the currencies and the notes with Fiji. He wasn't a big fan of the British Empire, but he decided to put my head on the 50-cent pieces, which I am now in Fiji, and the $7 bills. And you'll also see here that the Fijian flag has a British flag on the corner. And he'd also decided to take that off the Fijian flag. He'd run a competition where there was going to be a replacement flag after the Olympic Games. But because, as you'd seen in those previous photos, the flags were everywhere in the celebrations, the people of Fiji wanted to keep that flag there because of the relationship I had with the team as a British coach, and that now remains on the Olympic flag, on the flag of Fiji. And I left Fiji, maybe we might also talk about this in the Q&A. when do you leave somewhere as a coach, you know, on a up, on a low? We don't always, as coaches, have the opportunity to decide when we leave somewhere. I did, and I went to work in New York for a basketball team, and I got one of the basketball players to take me to his tattooist, Bang Bang on the Bowery in New York. A lot of you and a lot of teams have values, and you often see humility, loyalty, hard work plastered all over their training grounds, and then you see something very different when you're actually watching them and their behaviors. And now we had one value, Veilomani, and Veilomani means love each other, work together. And it kind of summed up my time in Fiji with all those players that you can be very ruthless and win back-to-back world titles and Olympic gold medals, but you can also be kind to each other. You can put others first, put the we before the me, and enjoy joyfully what you do and still achieve what you want to achieve. I always love telling the story of Fijians. I'm so proud to have worked for them and talk about them. But before the Q&A, I would just like to say thank you very much.